I don't know how much you paid attention, but for me, I like to win. Anybody else like to win? Yeah, and so when we talk about going for the gold medals that were given, and I know there's other medals, but the gold one's the one I care about. It's number one, right? These medals, though, don't just represent somebody winning. It represents a story of getting there and all the training that it took to win. But since we're talking winning, I mean, I don't know if you knew this or not. Some of you aren't Americans. Okay. It's okay. I mean, it's all right. But I was very disappointed in this number. I don't like ties, man. We needed one more gold. Ugh. I would have gone over there and done something, I don't know. As I looked up, what'd you say? Breakdance. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a sport, too. I got a whole, I looked up this week. I thought, what does it take? What kind of training do they do? And here's what came up for if you want to train to win a gold medal. You train 6 days a week, train several hours a day, constantly challenge your body, and have complete commitment. I started thinking about this in terms of that applies to our faith journey. I mean, I want to win the gold, and we're going to talk about what the gold is. Scripture talks about how there are rewards as we're faithful to God. So what does that look like? I don't even know what the rewards in heaven are, but if there are rewards, I'm in. I want them, And some of you are like, well, that's not what I'm doing this for. That's okay. Save them all. I'll take them. I'm okay with that, man. I want to serve Jesus, and if there's rewards in heaven, man, I want to take them. But I realize that behind that, really being successful, is this training. I found this quote as well. It says, you cannot expect mediocre training to produce gold medal results. Man, sometimes as Christians, those of you who are followers of Jesus, we have mediocre Bible reading, mediocre prayer life, and we're expecting God to work through us in this good, pleasing, perfect plan that he has for us. But you can't expect that. You see, God's got a part. He says, I've got a plan for you. I'm giving you the power. I'm giving you my spirit. I'm giving you the gifting to live that out. But he also says, you have a part. I have a part. And that's the training. That's why it's so important in our own mission statement. The middle of it is to train people to follow Jesus. And I have a part in this. How do I train? We want to equip by giving the tools, but I got to choose to do this. I got to have the passion. I got to have the full commitment to doing this. Unfortunately, we spend a lot of our time just wasted instead of training to live the life that God has for us. Our memory verse talks about this. Timothy, Paul is writing to Timothy, Paul who writes a lot of the New Testament. He says, do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Man, this verse really speaks to me during our political season. Have you watched the news lately? I'm like, this verse is coming to life. And it's a waste of time. I'm not saying politics necessarily. We're going to be talking about how we do have a part in that. But instead, what's it say? Train yourself to be godly. What if I quit doing this? I love the old wives' tales. My grandmother was great at those. As a kid growing up on the farm, I'd argue with her about those things. Anybody? You know what I'm talking about? But instead, say it again, train yourself to be godly. I mean, if we're going to live the purpose and plan that God has for us, if we're going to live in the gold, we're going to win. Jesus said that he came to give us a rich and satisfying life. Man, if I'm going to live that, I got to live this. God's offering it to us, but we have a part. Train yourself to be godly. I was just looking up, like this guy Noah. He just had won the 100. Man, and we were going, yeah, I want to win like that. But do you want to do what he did to get there? Spiritually, we can do this. Some of us are going, oh, this is overwhelming. You're just too challenging. No, we can do this. God's equipped us to do this, but we have a choice. Some of us, instead, we just kind of live like this. I mean, this poor girl, you know, she's trained, she made it, but she didn't make this was just even the qualifier. And we don't want that to be the picture of our spiritual journey. Sometimes we live so momentary that we just think, if I can just get through the day. No, this is about a marathon, a race, a life. And we cross the finish line and we hear, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what we're called to. So we got to train for this. One of the things I follow my news feed is pastors and churches. And some of you say, I don't even know what goes on in other pastors and churches. But for me, obviously, it's of great interest. And man, in the last few months, there have been some big, great pastors. I don't mean physically big. I mean pastors of large churches and that have ended like this. And that's all they're going to be remembered for. Not all the good they did. And we think, oh, man, let's finish well. We can do it. We can finish well and win the gold. How many of you want to finish well? I'm talking to about half the people that want to do that. Are the other half undecided? Okay, I'll try. I'll give you a chance, okay? Just fake it for a half an hour, okay? Just be a part of this for a half an hour. How many of you want to finish well? Okay, man, it's all in the training. My life will reflect godly values. I want to live into that as our training part that we need to really grab a hold of and understand today. And you can see this picture. It's not about just what I do today, but it's the whole race. You can see this picture, and if I give you one name, well, some of you can. Younger folks, you won't even know what I'm talking about. But if I say this guy's name, you just tell me the one word that you think of. Richard Nixon. Watergate. Why didn't you guys say White House? The guy ran and became president. He actually did some good things. But we remember him for one thing. We have to finish well. Matthew chapter 7, I'm going to just give you a little bit of what Jesus teaches us here. And this is the piece that we're really leaning into with one voice. If you don't know what that is, if you're new, our kids and our youth, they learn the same message, but on their level, age appropriate. So this is the piece that we're really leaning into together. Jesus, these are his words at the end of one of his greatest messages. He says this, beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. We'll unpack that for a few minutes. He goes on, he says, you can identify them by their fruit. That is, what is the fruit? He says, it's the way they act. Can you pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? I mean, he asked a rhetorical question there. What's the answer to that? Some of you are like, well, I just get mine at Safeway, so I don't know. A good tree produces good fruit. Bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. He's talking about the ultimate destiny there. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, you can identify people by their actions. One of the things that we struggle with in our culture, in our society, and even as a church is judging others. Jesus told us, don't judge. But we connect that often with identifying their fruit. We can tell who somebody is by their actions. And Jesus here is talking about our actions. In another place, Jesus talks about, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, that the fruit of our lives is the lives around us that are changed. The fruit that we're going to take to heaven with us is change, transform lives. And that's why we as a church are so passionate about our mission. Now, I want to lean into a little bit here of what Jesus starts out with. He really wants us to understand and be trained to separate the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is teaching that leads to Christ. I mean, that's our mission. We want to point you to Jesus. My past is back here behind me. The future is Jesus. Let's keep our eyes on Jesus. Sometimes people will come and say, Jeff, I love this church, but I can't keep coming if you just keep talking about Jesus. And I'm like, I can't help you. That's all we're going to do. And I tell people this all the time. If you don't like our style, or if you don't like me, which I cannot even imagine. Thanks, Ted. Oh, you can't? Thank you. I wasn't sure what you were saying. Okay, I'm making sure. Man, I'll say, let me help you find another church. I'll help you do that. But when somebody tells me, I don't want to go to this church because you're talking too much about Jesus, I'm like, I can't help you find another church. Because a church that's not talking about Jesus, I'm not connected with, and I don't want to send you to. I want you to know Jesus. He wants us to understand the good and keep our eyes on that. He wants us to be able to train in such a way that we can separate out the bad. And that is the off-centered but benign ideas that are tacked onto the gospel. This is where a lot of Christianity gets in trouble today. They're not evil ideas. They sound good. It's the latest, the greatest, the newest. Jesus said, beware of these new messages. Beware of them. Anything less than the gospel. The gospel is Jesus and the cross. As I've grown older, for some reason, I started liking some of the old songs that I didn't like when I was growing up. The old hymns. I heard them growing up with my grandmother around, and I'm like, oh, I just don't like that music. And now, like, one of them I love is the Old Rugged Cross. And I'm like, I like the message of that. It's like, keep my eyes. It's all about the cross and Christ. I mean, Christianity that's the whole message right there in the cross. There are a lot of good teachings out there that sound good. They're not good, but they sound good, and they just get our eyes off of Jesus. And if the enemy can get our eyes off of Jesus, it will go from benign to spiritually cancerous. Beware, be careful. I mean, we understand this, the struggle of this, because, I mean, how many of you go to the doctor and you have an ailment? How many of you look on Google first before you go to see what your ailment is? Yeah, I have a doctor friend, and she's told me, she's like, oh, Dr. Google just drives me nuts sometimes, you know? And I get that with theology. People come in, they got all this new theology, and Jeff, you got to get on board with this. And I'm like, where'd you get this from? Google? It's got to be true. It's on Google, right? And it's like, Google theology is dangerous. Man, we got to stick with biblical theology. And that's why that's one of our core values is biblical authority. The last one is the ugly. That one may be a little easier for us, but it's false teaching. Man, it's just pointing us completely away from Jesus. So we have to be careful of this. And Jesus warns us here of this. If we're going to live godly values, we got to watch out because this comes disguised as harmless sheep, but they're actually vicious wolves. And he's talking here about people, teachers, teachings. How do we even identify them? What does that look like in our lives? If I'm going to go for the gold, I got to be aware of this. Well, false prophets or those false teachings, they're always motivated by one of these three things: materialism, self-promotion, or power. And I said this in the last service. I said that, you know, during our political season, you'll see this a lot in politicians. And Heather Laplin, who's running for sheriff, was sitting right here. And after service, she said, I'm just a little offended. But I did say this. I said, there are a lot of good politicians, and we need godly politicians. But beware, some people make politics all about my favorite politician, and you don't know them. They're just trying to get elected, and usually it's based on this. We need godly politicians. But listen, your vote is not a Valentine vote. You don't have to love them. This is more like a chess move. There's no perfect people. Sometimes we make that about them, and then we hate everybody else, and whoo, we're in trouble. We've lost half the world that we can't share Jesus with. So be careful in that. We'll walk through being biblical in politics here in a few weeks. Watch out for these things. If it's leading toward this, we're in trouble. It's not pointing to Jesus. As followers of Jesus, we are to point toward this, living in contentment. Paul said this, contentment plus godliness is great gain. Servanthood. Jesus himself said, the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served. Character. Everything about what Paul writes as the fruit of the Spirit is pointing to the character of Jesus. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That we would pursue godly values so that we reflect Jesus. That's how we're going to reach people. That's how somebody reached me. And sometimes we think it's about us. And we can do this, not of our own volition, but we can do this by Christ in us. Jeff cannot do this. I hate it when somebody talks to themselves in the first person. cannot believe I just did that. Jeff Jeff's up here talking right now. You know? Isn't that weird when people do that? Okay, if you do that, don't do it around me, please. I can't do this on my own. My life will reflect godly values. So how do I live that out? So Jesus gives us a couple things in here that we can really put into action in our lives in these few verses. Go back and read them. And I'd encourage you to read the whole message. It starts in chapter 5. It goes all the way through. And this is part of this Sermon on the Mount message. But he says this. He tells us that we need to, what he really is giving us in a nutshell is that we need to reflect on the growth of our character and our conduct. Instead of materialism, our jobs, all those things, look at my character and my conduct. This changes everything. So as I'm going through something, through circumstances, if you're like me, there are a lot of circumstances sometimes I'm going, why me, God? Anybody else like that? And what if I start saying, oh, God, what are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to change in my character? Because I really do want to grow to be like Jesus. If you've been here the last few weeks, you've heard me share a little bit about what Kathy and I are going through. We had this vacation, my truck. I finally got my truck fixed, broke down. The RV broke down. I still haven't gotten it. The bill's just scaring me to death kind of thing. But God has used that for us to share Jesus with others. And so I'm just thinking this last week, maybe we'll get the RV back and we'll pay the bill. And Kathy calls me and says, hey, I'm stuck on the road. My car broke down. Now, my first thought was not, yay, God, I get to go witness to somebody this week. My first thought was, God, what else could break? And then when we sat there in her cars, we're waiting on AAA to come, we're like, God's up to something. He's working on, what if he's just working on my character? Yeah, God, I've said I want to let you transform me, my character and my conduct. Can I get to that place as I reflect and say, okay, God, whatever you want to do. Now, how do I know? Well, Jesus said, what my character and conduct is. When we look at others, he said this, that you'll know them, identify them by the way they act. If I can identify you by the way you act, and you can do that with me, I can do that with me. See, I have moments in my life where something comes out, or I respond one way, and I go, I can't believe I did that. That's a moment, that's an identifier moment of going, something's wrong in here. And God, I need you to help fix it. And that happens best and most under pressure. I hear people all the time say, well, that's not me. I was just under pressure. It's like, that's the real you. Kathy, before she met me, she dated a guy. And by the way, I don't know if you know this. I haven't told this for a long time, but our last name is Love. My wife, before she dated me, she actually dated a guy named Brian Haight. Man, was I her salvation from that, huh? Woo, she could have been a hate, but she became a love. It wasn't this guy, but she tells a story about she was dating this guy, and I think it was the way she tells is an old classic Mustang. It was the guy's car and her dad's car, his dad's car, and that night it was icy, and they spun out, and she thought, man, he's a really good guy, kind of. I don't know that she would say he was godly, but she thought he was a great guy. But he hit the guardrail, and she said what came out of his mouth was different. And she realizes, oh, what comes out at that moment, that's the real us. That's the real me. I can identify and say, oh, God, this is an area where you need to work in my life. I can't believe that, I know that was on that bid at work. I wanted to get it so bad, so I fudged the numbers just a little. Why did I do that? That's the real me. Or my taxes. I didn't want to pay all of my taxes, so I didn't quite claim, I'm a cheat. No, yeah. God, you got to change my heart. Or those lustful desires. It's like, oh, God, I can identify by the way I act what's really going on in my heart. And boy, me and Jesus, I don't want to go back to my sinful ways. I want him to keep taking me one step at a time closer to him. My conduct, my character. And we can do this because we're not doing it on our own. We are not willing ourselves to do this. We're saying, Jesus, transform me. And he wants to do that. He's working in our lives to do that. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says this, so we need to take this as a warning. He says, not everybody who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. The way he says this is so powerful. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. Man, let's not play Christianity. Let's not play church. Let's be the church. He said, only those who actually do the will of my Father. What's the will of Father? Love God, love others. Jesus said, here's what I have for you to go do now, to love others. Go, make disciples. Be my witnesses and make disciples. That's Christian maturity. That I'm following Jesus so much that I'm like, who am I discipling, Lord? Give me people that I can disciple. Help me to go out and do that. Help me to lead people to you. That's why it's part of our mission statement, to lead people to Jesus, train them to follow Jesus, send people out to lead for Jesus. Let's actually do what he says to do. My life, let's say it again together, my life will reflect godly values. Reflect on the growth of my character and conduct. So be really aware here. Jesus warns us of the shiny new. And I get it. I like the shiny new. I mean, when the new phone comes out, I'm like, oh, there's some bells and whistles. When the new car comes out, I get it. Want to remodel my house, get the shiny new. But be aware when it comes to our biblical theology. Are we looking at the shiny new? Jesus warned about it. Or are we going to say, no, what does God say? Let's let godly values, who he is. Jesus didn't come to say, there's other examples coming. He said, no, I am your example. Follow me, obey me, be like me. Second thing that I just want to give us today is that maximize Jesus and minimize myself. If I'm going to live out godly values and really have an influence with those around me, whether it's my family, my spouse, my kids, my parents, my friends, my neighbors, if I'm really going to influence daily towards Jesus, I have to maximize Jesus and minimize self. I minimize Jeff. It's not about me. And as you come to this church, you know, every once in a while I share my opinion. I try to tell you, though, this is just Jeff's opinion. And take it for what it's worth. And I can tell you what it's worth. Okay? It's worth nothing. What's of value is this. I want to really lean into teaching you, talking about Jesus and his word. So I need to maximize in my life every day. Jesus, minimize Jeff. In this passage in Matthew 7, Jesus tells us a good tree produces good fruit. Man, even as we read this, I grew up on a farm where there's a part of me that goes, wait, well, duh, Jesus, yeah, that's true. Bad tree produces good fruit. But this is the part that gets me. He says, a good tree can't produce bad fruit. That's where I want to live. I want to live in such a way that I'm following Jesus that it just becomes impossible to produce bad fruit. I'm not there yet. I'm still maturing and being transformed. But he also goes on to say, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. Sometimes we as Christians, with the world, we're just trying to get them to produce good fruit. They can't. I couldn't until Jesus came in my life. It was about me. So we have to say, oh, we're going to produce good fruit. We're going to be the character. We're going to model Jesus. We are going to go, make disciples. We're going to go and be witnesses. And that's all we can do. This is kind of like the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. The thermometer just tells us the reflection. Like Jesus said, you can identify them by the way they act. I can identify what's going on in my heart. I can identify people by the way they act. This, training for godliness, training for the gold, man, this is setting it and saying, I know where I'm going. And my eyes are focused on Jesus and the cross. I got a lot of training still to do. Y'all know what I'm talking about? I meant for you, not for me. Ted, you know me a little too well. You're probably like, yeah, I know. You got a lot of training left to do. Hurt my feelings. We're going to talk afterwards, Ted. John chapter 3, these are the words, speaking of, these are the words from John the Baptist. John the Baptist led the way for Jesus in the desert. He said this, his words, not mine. He, speaking of Jesus, must become greater. He must become greater and greater and I must become less and less. Would you read those words with me? He must become greater and greater. I must become less and less. Man, that's a real cultural norm, isn't it? I mean, I should write this book. It'll sell. Everybody be, what are you writing that for? That's not what culture tells us. But if we're going to reach the purpose that God has for us, if we're going to live in the goal that he has for us, the good, pleasing, perfect life, the rich and satisfying life that Jesus has for us, and he wants us to, he came and paid a tremendous price for that, then we need to live like this. Godly values, God, it's about you and your values, not me or my values. I want my values to totally line up with you. One of the ways that I have wrestled with this in my life is through this simple prayer. I started praying this for myself just privately when I was a young teenager. I'm a pretty ambitious guy. I always have visions. And my wife will tell you that, and my staff will tell you just I'm always thinking of new ideas. And so I started praying, Lord, don't let me succeed at something that will take me off your plan. And here's how this has played out in my life. I could tell you probably many, many stories of how it's played out in my life. But one that was really impactful for me was when Kathy and I had just gotten married. I had studied art and music in college, had scholarships in both of those. And so I love songwriting. And by the way, I do want to invite you tonight. Kathy and I are going to be leading just a time of worship and prayer. I mean, the whole night will just be one big prayer, even though there's a lot of music. It's the music of prayer and us just being with God. So I'd love to have you here for that. But in that time, I loved songwriting. In fact, so much so that I thought, if I can start selling enough music, I'm not going to do this ministry thing. I mean, that would be my ministry is kind of what I thought, so I don't have to be in church work. If you know my story, I remember early on saying, the one thing I won't do in life is be on staff at a church. You see how that's worked out? Watch what you tell God. And I know y'all do the reverse engineering, trying to reverse psychology God, like I never want to live in Hawaii, God, and hoping he'll send you there. That doesn't work either. So I had this privilege. I at the time they were doing huge musicals for Easter and Christmas for the church. So I had written an Easter musical, and a company, a producer in Nashville, had signed me for it. They started doing all this. And by the way, my wife, when we met, that's part of our connection is through music. She's a real creative genius. I had written hundreds of songs. And after we got married, she wrote one song, and it got published right away. And I'm like, man. But she learned from me, I figure. I don't know. But I'll never forget the plane ride to Nashville when they flew me out there. The lady sitting next to me said, so why are you going to Nashville? And I said, well, I'm a songwriter, and I'm going to meet with my publisher. And that was a moment where I went, oh, this is what I want so bad. I mean, it was just one of those moments. We get fast forward to getting close to when it should have been released for churches for Easter. And the publisher calls me up and says, man, we hate to do this to you. We're out of money, and we're actually going to close our doors so we can't publish your thing. And they'd already put all the arrangements in and paid all the arrangers and everything. And I'm like, well, can I shop it around for next Easter? And they go, yeah, feel free to do that. We still own it, though. But I'm like, okay, I'll shop it, though. And so another company right away is like, wow, we're interested. Can't believe the arranger you got. We like it. Come time for it to be published for the next Easter. They give me a call, and they said, we hate to do this to you, but we're out of money, and we're not going to be able to publish this. By then, I'm thinking every producer in Nashville is going, don't sign anything this Jeff Love guy, because he closes businesses down, you know? That's the kind of writer he is. And at first, there's a part of me, and I struggled with this for years, just saying, God, I still want to do this, but God was closing the door. He was answering this prayer for me. And here's why I share that. I share it because if we're really going to live godly values, we've got to be so committed. We say, God, would you keep me from? Lead me not into temptation. Jesus said, pray that. God doesn't tempt us. What he's saying there is, pray that God would keep us from the temptation to get off of being godly people, to get our eyes off of Jesus. I don't know why God closed that door, except I know I couldn't have handled that success, and I'm okay with that. I never thought I'd do this, but Kathy and I are so fulfilled. We are living the rich and satisfying life that God has for us. And if it had been up to me, I'd have lived a different life. But we are so grateful now. And we have seen lives transformed, how God has used us. We've just been amazed. And it's not because of us. It's because of Jesus through us. Yeah. So that we would pray this, God, I want to live your values. Now, here's what I'm going to challenge you to do, because this all connects to say that, man, I know you're investing in lives, and especially I want to challenge those of you who are followers of Jesus, that we have an event coming up, and to really bring your friends in, and you bring them every week, and I hope you do, because always want to talk to both audiences, but commit to investing in the lives of those who do not know Jesus and invite them to experience the transformative power of following Jesus. So invite them to that event. We just kind of make it easier a few times a year. We have jumping castles and food and all that. It'll be fun. It's the surf and turf. No, what is it called? Something. What is it? I should know the name of it. Summer Splash. Yeah, didn't that sound like surf and turf? It's lunchtime. I don't know. Babe, can we have? No. But listen, if we don't live godly values, sometimes we're trying to invite someone, we're trying to invest in someone, but they've already identified us by our acts. The hardest thing when I share my faith with somebody is that they go, I already know a Christian. Or if I'm inviting them to church, they're like, I've already been to church. And what they're saying to me is, I saw how they acted. I saw that if Christians are like that, I don't want to be like that. That's not all Christians. I'm not saying that. But for us, a life church, that we would say we're investing in lives because this is a part of who we are. And God, I fail often. I don't reflect you, Jesus. But I want you to change my values. I want to have godly values. I want to live this out every day so that I can influence daily. Because that's the goal. I want to show you a verse here. Jesus, at the end there, he says, we've read it already, any produce that doesn't produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. And none of us want that. I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I want the gold. And here's what he tells us the gold is. Father, I want these whom you've given me to be with me where I am. That's the gold. I think when we go from this life to heaven and we walk in, we're going to go, oh, everything I thought it was, it's like just to be in the presence of Jesus for eternity and his glory. He goes on and say, then they can see all the glory you gave me. We can't see that all yet. We see in part. But that when we walk into heaven's gates to say, this is it, just to be in God's glory and presence, no more temptation, no more drifting, but just to be in his presence. That's the gold. And then others around us, they'll say, thank you. There'll be people saying, thank you, Alive Church, and we're going to go, we don't even know you. And they, yeah, but you guys invested in Bibles, and my life was changed, and thank you. That's the gold. Let's go for the gold. Are you guys ready to do that? We can do this. Not on our own strength, though. We can invest in people and see lives transformed. I'm so glad somebody did that for me. My life will reflect godly values. This is where it starts. Now, as we've been talking about this, I want to end with prayer. And here's what I know. Some of you, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, there's some values you'd say, oh, I can identify in me that I'm not living a godly value. You can. Jesus says we identify by our actions, and I know that about myself. So I need to just confess it and say, okay, God, I'm ready for you to start transforming me in this way to be more like Jesus. And once he gets done with that one and I get good at that, then there's always something else because I'm not Jesus yet. You know what I'm saying? I'm never going to be Jesus, but I'm going to be like him someday when I see him face to face. That's what Scripture says. We get to heaven. No more sin. So I want to pray over that. And for those of you who are not followers of Jesus yet, that you would see that really winning the gold in life and in eternity, it's about living the purpose and plan he has for you. And it starts by putting your faith in him. Father, thank you for this moment. We can look back on your teaching and how applicable it is for our lives. God, we can know others. We can identify ourselves by the way we act. Are we acting like Jesus? Lord, for those who are your followers, you've been speaking to our hearts already, Holy Spirit, during this teaching, about areas of our lives where we just are not really living godly values. And we want to give you permission to touch that area. We want to start our training, to be trained up in the spiritual disciplines to walk away from sin or to walk away from laziness in that area so we would reflect you, Jesus. Lord, I pray over those who don't know you. And if that's you right now, make this your prayer. Just say, Lord, I want to invite you into my life. I want to live the life you have for me. The good, pleasing, perfect plan. I want to go for the gold. I want eternal life. Forgive me my sin and let that journey begin right now. In Jesus' name, amen.